Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's SIS Coffee Talk. I am Michael Owen, the Deputy Principal of Sunway International School, and I will be your moderator for this evening. This is the sixth talk in our series, and our topic for this evening will be on inclusive and special education, implications for schools and parents. Our speakers for this evening are Ms. Peggy Lam, Lead Coach and Special Education Consultant at Bridging Hope Transition Learning Center, Ms. Tan Cheng Yi, Chartered Educational Psychologist, and Dr. Cheng Mien Wee, Executive Director of Sunway International Schools and Director of Pre-University Studies at Sunway College. I've had the distinct privilege of working with Sunway Education Group in both the pre-university program and Sunway International School. I started my career in 2006 as an English and economics teacher in the Canadian International Matriculation Program, or CIMP, and then I leapt at the opportunity to be a founding member of the teaching staff when Sunway International School opened its doors back in 2008. In my many years working with Sunway, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of students with special education needs, or SEN, and each student was unique, and they brought with them a diverse set of opportunities and challenges both inside and outside of our classrooms. The purpose of this evening's event will be to engage in a conversation about special education needs and how we as parents and educators can both support and foster development for our children and our students. So before we begin, I'd like to go over some of our expectations to keep in mind as we get into our talk. So first off, this evening will be roughly an hour to an hour and a half long, including our Q&A. All of the lines will be muted, so do please use the chat function to post any questions. I'll be monitoring the chat and interject when and where I can. Otherwise, we will reserve the question for the end. And as well, if you have any questions and you'd like to speak to our speakers directly, you can use our live Q&A session at the end. And do bear with us if there are any technical slips along the way. We'll do our best to attend to any if they were to pop up. So now let me introduce our speakers for this evening. Ms. Peggy Lam has experience working with all ages, but now focuses on teenagers, adolescents, and adults with learning differences. Her educational and experiential background is wide and varied, with her most recent achievement earning a master's in education, majoring in special education from the University of Southern Queensland, Australia. Peggy is trained to administer therapeutic listening with the whole body and job coaching. Peggy also currently serves as corporate secretary for the Special Education Network in Asia's chapter and volunteered as a facilitator and coach with Autism Initiatives Malaysia, or AIM High. Ms. Tan Cheng Yi is a UK chartered educational psychologist specializing in development, disability learning, mental health, and behavior of children and young people. She was one of the pioneering clinicians at Oasis Place, setting up the practice and leading a team of practitioners. Cheng Yi currently offers face-to-face and online consultations, assessment and psychological interviews at Subang Jaya Medical Center, just too close by from where we are now. Her core skills and passion are to work with individuals and groups in the therapeutic setting, which include parenting training and professional development for teachers and raising public awareness on mental health and disability. And our third speaker for this evening is Dr. Cheng Mien Wee. She is the Executive Director of Sunway International Schools and Director of Pre-University Studies at Sunway College. Mien brings to international education decades of experience working with universities in the United States, Canada, UK, and Europe, along with the Asia Pacific on admissions and higher education. Mien received her Bachelor of Science with Education and Master in Education from University of Malaya, Master of Arts in Work-Based Learning from Middlesex University in the UK, and most recently a PhD in Education from Monash University, Australia. Her doctoral thesis focused on internationalization of curriculum. She is also a wife, mother, grandmother, and Sunday school teacher. Now that you've been introduced to our speakers, here's a brief overview of tonight's topic. A recent UNICEF study shows that children with special needs in Malaysia are often hidden, excluded, and face daily stigma for their marginalization due to the lack of information in the area of special education needs and people with special learning needs. While inclusion and opportunities are crucial for SEN children to reach their full potential, it is important for us to explore this topic, to understand its practices and challenges, as well as how mainstream schools could support learning and community building for all. At a glimpse here, there are approximately 450,000 registered persons in Malaysia with disabilities based on the statistics gathered by the Department of Social Welfare in Malaysia. This reality could certainly stretch further throughout the years, and also to keep in mind that there may be those who have not registered for this survey. While the word disability has been frequently used in statistics, we generally prefer to use terms like learning differences, special needs, differently abled, or neurodiversity. As we can see in this chart, both learning and physical disabilities are typically the most common type, making up more than 30% of Malaysians in each category. There may be persons that may be categorized in multiple categories. So it is important to note that learning disabilities, it is also important to note that learning disabilities is also a wide category with many degrees that require greater understanding and approaches to meet these special learning needs. So with this introduction, let's begin our conversation for this evening. My first question is, what is special needs education, or SEN, and what does SEN mean? And I'd like to direct this question to Ms. Chen Yi.
Hi, evening everyone, and thanks, Michael. Also want to thank SIS for this initiative, and to say hello to everyone. I recognize some names out there. Nice to see you all. Yeah, I think I would like to start by saying that SEN, or special educational needs, describes the educational needs of a wide range of neurodiverse children, where in the past we've used the words, disability or special needs. The preferred word now is neurodivergent, to remind us that brain differences does not necessarily mean deficits. Yeah, brain deficits. So children with special needs require certain modifications to the way that we would conduct learning and schooling. So special needs includes all the things that Michael has introduced earlier. And over here, I just want to pinpoint maybe the three main ones. I won't go into all the details for time's sake, but just to say that, one of the common types of children that can be included in a setting, in a mainstream school setting, are children with autism spectrum disorder. And you can see that, the little graph to the right, you can see that children with autism, they have a range of IQ ability. So, they may be on the spectrum, but have different varying abilities. So children who have got perhaps higher capacity to learn intellectual ability may be able to be included in a school like a mainstream school like SIS. And then there are also other learners like those with, I think, a next graph, the next slide, please. Learning difficulties like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, or some language learning difficulties. So we have a variety, and the last one, ADHD. As you can see, some of the characteristics there show that they have a range of difficulties as well as associated difficulties, which includes behavior learning and even social problems. So, but today's talk is about inclusive education. And inclusive education are programs that allow neurodiverse children to learn with other students, their peers in the same classroom. So when we talk about special educational needs and inclusion, we must remember that there are different levels, different severity. And sometimes some of these challenges are hidden until you really get to know the child. So back to inclusion, in most cases, children may need the best fit environment or the environment with least restriction. So with inclusion, we are thinking about children who are on the mild to moderate kind of spectrum that would be able to, cope with the mainstream setting. And for the mainstream setting to be able to cope with their challenges as well. So it goes both ways. So example of this would be, someone from the mild learning category requiring short-term attention. It may be someone that needs some pulling out classes to catch up on their, mathematics or their reading capacity before they can then catch up and be on the right track again. But a child with moderate learning needs may require longer term attention. And so they may have an individualized learning plan. They may need a buddy in the classroom to help them to participate in social groups. They may have sensory difficulties that means that they need to wear a headphone to cancel out noise and things like that. So, but their needs are within reason, and you can still cope with them within the mainstream classroom. I think that's what this talk is about, isn't it? Special educational needs within an inclusive setting. Back to you, Michael.
Sorry, thank you, Peggy. Thank you, Cheng Yi. I would like to turn the next question to Miss Peggy Lam. What are the different settings or provisions necessary for children with special education needs? And related to this, what types or how much of these settings provisions are available here in Malaysia?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Cheng Yi. I think hello everyone. I see some familiar names like Cheng Yi mentioned earlier. So yeah, I think Cheng Yi mentioned earlier about the different, some of the different abilities of the children. So I think she talked a little bit about the push in and push out services, where some of these children actually need some support, maybe mathematics, reading, and they're being pulled out from the classroom. And then after that, within maybe 45 minutes, they are sent back in. So this can be done by if the school, have like some external expertise or even some support or teacher aides that might be able to do that. The next is inclusive classroom. Inclusive classroom is what we really advocate or talk about today. So inclusive classroom is where there are maybe some level 1 and level 2, as what Cheng Yi explained earlier, with minimal students, and they all learn together in the same classroom as the other children. But they might have a teacher aide in the class to support the main teacher in the classroom, but they all learn together. The next is self-contained classroom. Self-contained classroom are those maybe with 4 to 12 students in the class, but they are headed by a special education teacher with some support from other students. For first, second, and third type of settings, it is easily available in our mainstream school or our SP, which I will talk about later. It is available in Malaysia. The next one is specialty schools. These are catered mainly for all the special needs students. In Malaysia, these are also available. There's a handful of them. The last one is residential programs. Unfortunately, I think this is the one that we currently don't have much availability in Malaysia. Many are trying to set the last residential programs, but we don't know anyone that is quite established at this present moment. So there is much more that we need to work for the special education settings in Malaysia at the moment. So some schools, they will feature the if you look at the visual on the right, with mild and moderate students, there are some of this availability in services in the schools. Next, please. So when we talk, next slide. So the next setting will be our Malaysian public school settings. So currently in Malaysia, we do have different type of special education schools. The integration and the inclusive schools. And there are at least 6,394 according to the 2021 data. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, I can control it. All right, thank you. So you can see here, these are some numbers with the breakdown of different ages group, which I won't go into details, but if you look at these numbers, there's obviously a growth. Maybe the next slide with the data, you can see a graph trend where since 2017 to 2021, the numbers has actually grown. So obviously there's a big need in Malaysia for the special needs program. Thank you. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Peggy, for sharing more and building context on tonight's topic. I would like to turn the next question back to Cheng Yi. How are parents of SEN children able to know which educational settings best suit their children's learning and development?
Yeah, so to answer that question, I mean, I think it's a really good question because there isn't a one size fits all. And I think globally, there isn't enough educational settings to fit everyone, especially the children who have learning challenges. So I think we really need to ask ourselves as parents, what is something that you want the school to do for your child? What you want to achieve out of it. Most schools have certain standards about what children should be able to do at certain ages. So as far as I know, schools would have their entrance tests. So they need to go and find out and speak to the schools whether your child's level is suitable for the school. And it's only fair for the school to take children that they can adequately provide for their needs. If you're uncertain, then you can go and have an assessment done. And there are many places you can go for an assessment. The best thing is actually to go and see a developmental pediatrician. There are not that many in Malaysia, maybe not more than 20. So if you can't get access to them, go and see your child's pediatrician. And psychologists and other trained professionals who work with children with special needs, like myself and Peggy, would be able to give you advice as well. And many of you would have your children's therapist, a speech therapist, and occupational therapist, and other behavioral therapists. And they would know your child well and would be able to have this conversation with you about the available schools out there and what they think would be suitable for your child. But I would also like to add that the placements needs to be reviewed regularly, right? So if you look at this slide here on developmental domains, what contribute to a child's success at school, a child's readiness for school, really depends on many things. If you think about their cognitive and their learning needs, do they have basic skills to enter school? So if your child is 5 going on 6, going into from preschool to primary school, do they have some basic reading, a decoding skill, some mathematical sense? Are their motor skills ready for them to sit in a classroom, hold on to a pencil, play in a playground? Do they have the communication skills to get along with people and understand others? Do they have the social skills to be able to mingle and play? Do they have adaptive self-help skills? Can they go to the bathroom by themselves, get their food, eat their food by themselves, take the school bus to school, etc. So, I think we need to think about these things and not just think about, as Asian parents, sometimes I find that, the emphasis is a lot on the learning. So when your child is able to learn, we think that they're ready, the academic learning, but there are so many aspects of a child's development that make them school ready. And I think I said a little bit earlier, the fact that the placements need to be reviewed regularly because conditions such as autism, ADHD, learning conditions, dyslexia, etc., it is developmental, which means that it changes as the child develops. So I work with many children who can cope with, let's say, the elementary or key stage 1 or key stage 2, standard 1 to standard 3, perhaps. But as the demands get higher, they start to struggle. And they also mature at a different rate from other typical children. And that makes it difficult for them to cope. I mean, they may have the ability to learn mathematics and good and science and computer studies, but the social maturity may not be, going at the same rate. So we really need to review it from time to time and have this open discussion and collaboration with the school about what best meets the child's needs. Yeah. So yeah, I think I hope that answered the questions about what is suitable. How do you know if the education placement is suitable for your child? Get your child ready, but talk to people and be open to consider that they need a wider holistic preparation rather than just academic skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheng Yi. And again, thank you for providing more enlightenment on the diverse set of challenges and needs that each individual may need and how we need to be sensitive to that. So before we get to the next question, I do want to highlight in the chat, Anne Sivanathan has shared with everyone that the National Autism Society of Malaysia, or NASAM, is in the midst of setting up a residential program. So if you are interested in giving feedback or having a meeting with Anne, please contact her. Her email is in the chat. Now moving on to our fourth question for this evening, I would like to turn this to Ms. Peggy. As a special education consultant, please share with us your views on inclusive education. So for example, what is inclusive education about? And how do you think schools can work towards building stronger inclusion?
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Anne, for the great news. Yes, we will be very excited to know more about that. So as an educator myself, I think an inclusive environment is where all students learn together. And we focus on abilities and not disabilities. We also celebrate diversity, individuality, and we share respect and empathy to everyone in the classroom. To me, that's what an inclusive classroom will be. So I know it's not easy to do this, it means that all children in the same classroom, same school. Does it really work? So what I would like to share here on some ideas or some possible accommodations that we can provide to the classroom and to assist the teachers on how to have an inclusive classroom. First is with proper structure, with a relevant schedule and routine, with the right environment and the tasks all clearly stated out to the students. It is definitely possible. The next one is that using clear language. That means we don't use lots of words. Less is more. Continue to use positive words and maybe keep repeating some of the instructions that we want to have for our students. As Cheng Yi mentioned earlier, a peer buddy. This is also my favorite. When I consult with most parents and teachers, a lot of time we will recommend peer buddy system because this, with support from a friend who is much more good at this subject, or like someone who are highly popular in the class, this student who might be least confident or they need a little bit of support will be helpful in the classroom. Differentiated instructions. I think this is basically catering to the students' learning abilities. The final one is the visual help with labels and pictures. I think we all use label and pictures in all our things. So with a little bit of this setup and things in the classroom, inclusive class, it will definitely help with, to support having all these children with different abilities in the classroom. Thank you, Michael. I hope that helps a little bit to those who, want to set up an inclusive classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, again, for sharing your expertise as a special education consultant. Moving forward, our third speaker hasn't had an opportunity to take a question yet, so I would like to direct the fifth question to Dr. Mien. With your school administration experience, what are your perspectives on inclusive education?
Thanks very much, Mr. Owen. I do not have any attractive slides as the rest of my panel colleagues do, but I do appreciate very much Ching Yi and Peggy for the very strong illustrations that have set the context for our understanding of tonight's topic. Yeah. So as a school administrator, I think clearly, inclusive education is about meeting the needs of different children. All children are different, and hence every school has its sets of readiness or preparedness assessments. Ching Yi talked a little bit about that earlier on. And so if we are, to assess in typical situations where students are in terms of their knowledge and their skill set so that we place them appropriately, what more in situations where our children need extra special attention? So the first perspective as administrators of schools is the attention that we need to pay towards assessing the students, particularly students who need special education or spec ed cases, so that we place them appropriately. And sometimes schools ourselves are not fully equipped for that role because teachers are not all teachers are trained in spec ed, and again, how does the school therefore work with external expertise, to make sure that we place the student in the best possible learning situation. The focus is always on the child. I think I'd like to go into a more candid perspective of inclusive education. I think often as administrators, when we get past the nuts and bolts, as it were, the checklist of admissions, the conversations would then center upon, how are you going to run, how would schools run inclusive education? What does it mean for me? So to some parents whose children may not be requiring special attention, would having a school that embraces special education or inclusive education, will that reduce my own child's development? Will it slow down the class? For others whose children may require spec ed or special education and special support, is a typical school, a regular school, an environment for my child? And these are good questions. These are very real questions and important questions. So how does the school work with parents to establish a safe environment and a suitable environment so that children will have the best opportunities to learn? In such a context, I think for administrators, we often also work with parents' perspectives. So it's not just our perspectives as administrators. I see my colleague, Mr. Michael Owen, nodding because herein lies, associated with the questions that I've just posed to you, my dear, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. So often, we want to go back to the role of the school. When the school is open to having an inclusive community, it is because we believe that the school is a subset of a larger community. And it is about preparing our children, not just with the knowledge and skills that they need to have, but really the knowledge and skills they need to have in order to live life in the future, particularly when they are older. And often when the parents speak to me or speak to Mike, I suppose, about exactly, like, will my child thrive in such a situation? And I look at their children play, I see, their children playing with other children, and they're playing fine. And so often we realize that actually a lot of the discriminatory thoughts are not with the children. They embrace the differences very, very readily. And if we continue to allow them to embrace and acknowledge and to develop living with different individuals, that would augur very well for their lives in the future. So I think my third and big perspective often when people ask me, how would you see inclusive education? How ready are we? We should be ready because that's life. We live in an environment where all of us are different, and schools should therefore not be too different from that. And so working with children to prepare them for not just life in the present, but also for the future, I think is my fundamental perspective or thoughts on inclusion in education. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mian. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. I would like to drill a little bit deeper on your feedback based on your experience, and just ask to clarify, what are some of the key challenges you feel are encountered by schools in the efforts to embrace inclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, for drilling down. My thoughts. As mentioned, I think what I've said just now essentially talks about the challenges at the onset, at the first part, is to ensure that we've got children in the right learning settings. Okay, you may call them classrooms, you may call them groups. And herein, as I've mentioned, and Peggy and Ching Yi have done an excellent job in establishing the fact that all of us are different. I myself, I think sometimes, demonstrate some of the attributes, of someone who requires special developmental attention in certain areas. So recognizing that all of us are different, I think the first challenge or the first area schools need to work work on is to establish within that continuum who they can support, how they can support, and in what ways. So I think the first part is about not just aside recognizing the continuum of learning requirements or learning needs, is to establish what categories or what types of special ed, spec ed we can support. For example, in SIS, we have, as we move into having our school develop not just the awareness, but to embrace diversity, we also realize that we cannot work with, very advanced cases or cases that require, or children that require higher levels or more advanced support. I think working with Peggy and Ching Yi, I think level 1 and level 2 is perhaps the space that we find ourselves able to develop and to support. So establishing the levels of differences and how we can support it. And the next challenge is therefore the software and the resources that's required. And I'll be candid, ladies and gentlemen, and my colleagues here know this situation well. Not every teacher is trained in spec ed. I'm not, and I think Mike, I don't think you are either. Yeah, we've got our own specialisms, but spec ed is not something all teachers carry as a toolkit or as a credential, and that's fine and that's normal, and therefore the challenge is, I think, firstly, yes, of course, sourcing out and identifying, within our hiring structure, professionals that we can bring on our team as spec ed specialists. But the other part, I think, as a school, and SIS is, wanting to look into this even more and more, and that's to build a community and awareness, to build in the community the overall awareness and support. So campaigns, workshops, training that goes across everyone in the community. I like to often say, you may not be a teacher, you may be the security guard who patrols the school in the morning before the children come in, or you patrol the school towards the end of the school time to make sure that everyone has gone home. You may be the auntie that does the cleaning of the classrooms and the cafeteria, and the considerations you would have as the auntie, because you've got children with special needs. How do you keep your utensils? How do you use your utensils? Yeah, has to have special consideration, and that's not because and all that should be done in a very constructive way. Yeah, because we are just aware that there are different people and they interpret different children interpreting what they see around them and how they react or interact with their environment differently. So the second challenge that I'm alluding to is the need for manpower, staffing, professional development, ongoing awareness building. And really, I think the awareness building, I should not leave out parents. Yeah. So when I mentioned the uncle, security guard, the auntie cleaner, the community, a very important part of the community are us. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, moms and dads, grandparents. It's also our understanding and our appreciation of what inclusion means and how we can play a part in supporting and being a part of it. Honestly, I think all of us know that we cannot hide it. We cannot run away from it. It's something. We may have family members who require special attention. We may work in offices where some of our colleagues require it. And so really it is about understanding it, supporting it, and embracing it. So I think, the challenges, if I were to summarize, and thank you for listening to me, is firstly the diagnostic part, number 1, the assessment and the placement, number 2, the resourcing part, having the right people and the environment to promote and to support the children. And the last part is that nurturing and living part. Yeah, that is the challenge. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mien. Before I return to Cheng Yi and Peggy, a question has come up directed to you, Dr. Cheng, from Shun Ket Chia. Some inclusive schools use age groups as determining factors for class placement, even for SEN students. What is your view?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chia. Yeah. If I've gotten your name right, thank you for that question. And it's an excellently timed question because just 2-3 days ago, Principal Condrel and indirectly Principal Owen, Mr. Michael Owen, as well as our Director of Admissions were having this question around placing students according to age. Yeah, many schools would say age specific or age dependent, and really age is one parameter. Yeah, we assess students or we enroll students not just on age. As you know, even in a typical condition, you look at what are the grades or what are the schooling experiences the child has completed prior to coming in, some evidence of their achievements, and then age becomes a factor. So even as SIS looks at typical enrollment situations, we're looking now at a band or a range of age. So for example, you could start kindergarten, or we do already start a junior kindergarten or nursery education, early years education for our children from the ages of 3 to 5. And so on. So my answer to your question, Mr. Chia, is that age will be a factor, but it's not the sole determinant. There will be other criteria that we look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mien. Now we're turning to Cheng Yi. We understand that different educational settings are designed to accommodate different needs. So what is the main advantage and disadvantage of having inclusive education in mainstream schools?
I think there's definitely a lot more advantages, and I appreciate Mien, being so candid and honest. I think it's a process by where everyone learns to accommodate other people. Children are so diverse, and you meet one special needs child today and you think you know it all, but someone else comes and you're learning about that person. They're all very different. I like this comic to our left, where it says clearing a path for people with special needs clears the path for everyone. The idea that if schools and people, generally people in community, parents, teachers, everyone, think about inclusion as making the way, reducing barriers, making things more accessible. You would think about, okay, what's the best way of getting all these kids up to the school? Shoveling the stairs is not going to help everyone. So if I shovel the ramp, that would make it accessible to everyone. So the advantages are many, and the studies out there show us that really, it starts with a neurodiverse child, getting the equal opportunity and access for a broad and education, getting the education that they deserve, providing that social opportunities for them also to learn, because school is not just about academics, right? It's about learning how to live in this world with other people. So being in the real world with other children, and other children learn so much from it as well, developing empathy and tolerance, and really learning from the children with special needs. There's so much to teach us. And this really comes from the educators first. I think it's like top down. If we have the right view of things from the very top, and if the teachers use the kind of language that's inclusive, and have that culture where everyone, is seen as equal and, able, we just need to, and that can actually make a lot of difference to the entire classroom. So for educators, I think, Michael, you started by saying opportunities and challenges. Of course, there will be challenges, but then, without problems, we will not grow. So personal growth for the teachers and the ability to have those children in the class means that, they have greater engagement with them and learning from them, and stretching them to use more universal designs for learning, that would therefore be more flexible for everyone. The disadvantages, I have to say, is when placements perhaps are not the best match for the child. It takes two to tango. I do feel for parents that look for school, and it's difficult to find good schools, suitable schools for their children. And sometimes, they do want to see their child somewhere in a school, in a good school. but the right match, the suitable school is really important. So I think it's important for the parents to have an open mind to work with the school to ensure that, it is really the right place for the child in terms of providing, all the needs of the child, equipment, support, and the other disadvantage is potential is, I suppose, when schools, I think Mian mentioned this already, if you don't have the right professional development and training continuously, right, have the right support infrastructure, then there is, of course, that risk of maybe the child being viewed differently, maybe bullied and isolated, and possibly disrupted learning of other children. Yeah, so I think it's something that needs to be managed very well, and parents at school need to be very clear from the outset what the expectations are, and you need to really work together to make inclusion work.
Thank you, Cheng-Yi. I do see some questions in the chat, but I'll come to them shortly. I would like to direct the next question in our series to Peggy. How can we as parents, educators, and schools support and maintain a safe, positive, and inclusive learning environment for students with special needs?
Thank you, Michael. I put up here, I think Mian and Cheng-Yi both mentioned this. It is working together. I think the key word here is working together for communication. So it should be from the top management of the school all the way to the cleaners, the security guard, parents, teachers, even students, communicating with each other to get inclusive education work. Of course, when it comes to collaboration as well. So same thing, everybody needs to work together to get this done. And of course, proper training. I think we mentioned earlier, Mian mentioned it as well. Proper training from everybody in the school who want to make inclusive education work. Yeah, so the training from everybody should be is critical and crucial. Finally, I think with the understanding and accepting of each other. So maybe you see your friends having some challenges. How do we accept and understand that they are going through some difficulty? Instead of isolating them, how can we, like what Cheng-Yi mentioned as other children, how do we accept or embrace our friends who are having difficulty? I think that's the main thing to us as some of us that work in the industry. How do we advocate understanding and acceptance of all children, regardless of their disabilities? Yeah, that's what I thought, an inclusive education is crucial with these 4 points. Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Peggy. So before I get to my final question for Mian, I'd like to come back to the chat. So the first question in the chat is from Kosin Chin. And the question is, are there any training programs available for teachers to attend for handling students with special needs in inclusion classrooms? I can start in the Ontario Canadian program. There are special additional qualifications teachers can take on. There are costs involved in that. So again, that's not why every teacher would have it, but there are a number of levels in that program to help teachers learn more about how to support and including these students in their classrooms. And in general, when teachers do complete these programs, the expectation is, particularly at SIS, is that they share their insights and their learning with the rest of the academic teams through professional development and other activities. But to turn it over to Mian, Peggy, and Cheng-Yi, do you have any other insights on training programs that might be available here in Malaysia?
Maybe I can share. Yes, there are plenty of training. Actually, depending on what you are looking for. Are you looking for a professional paper qualification? There are a few universities now that offer a paper qualification for that. There are short-term courses that I think sometimes Cheng-Yi or even myself will conduct to the public. I volunteer with Special Education Network in Malaysia, and we run training or what we call professional development sharing with the community. And so, yeah, there are definitely. So, yeah, we would encourage you to look through some of the sites, or if you would need to know further, you can get in touch with us to find out what are some of the courses available out there.
Yeah, and just to add very quickly, I think she mentioned that the universities, maybe Nottingham Uni, and I think, is it SEGI? I might be wrong, Peggy, you have to correct me, but yeah, and also Heels Learning, I think provide, this is a private center that provides additional.
Currently, there's a new university in Ipoh called Quest International that actually offered bachelor's of, for special needs education as well.
All right, thank you, Peggy. Thank you for Cheng-Yi for addressing Sinchin's question. I have one more from Ling Ling, but I'll get to that question when we get to the Q&A session. I would like to end our series of prepared questions and direct this one back to Dr. Mien. As Executive Director of SIS, how do you envision SIS's role in inclusive and special education?
Great question, Mike. I think I would respond in 3 words. I think the way I see or envision SIS's role in inclusive and special education would be 1, firstly, that promotes, secondly, that embraces, and lastly, that innovates. I want to qualify that by saying that, firstly, as part of the Sunway Education Group, we are very much, not just subscribing and promoting, but we want to, as much as we can, live out in education and research the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of us know, therefore, SDG is about quality education, and quality education includes opening up access or equitable access, equal access, to as many students, groups of students as possible, and therefore the topic of inclusive education and special education is why we are gathered tonight. I also say it is about embracing, that our role is to embrace, because in delivering any form of education, and spec ed is no different, the responsibility is in its sustainability and its continuity. So again, we've talked about the commitment to identifying staff and hiring staff. So as a school, for example, SIS, as we embrace, working with children that require spec ed, we would be hiring a team of teachers. Not all teachers, as Mike and others have established or explained, will have spec ed background. We will supplement that with as much training and professional development as we can. But otherwise, we would have a core team, a small team perhaps, but a core team of someone who would be coordinating the special education program and the needs of the students and the assessments, educational assistants who will be there to support, but we will not be able to cover all grounds because we are not a special education school. SIS remains a regular school, a typical school, but a school that wants to work with students that would require different levels of educational attention. And so we would be working, I foresee, and we already are, and I hope for that to continue, collaborating with external parties. Peggy, she hasn't mentioned it, but she's part of an organization called Bridging Hope, and again, Cheng-Yi and others that we have been working with. We envisage that the school cannot stand alone unless it's a dedicated or specialized school. So SIS will be very much working in collaboration as it embraces inclusion and special education. And the last word I used is to innovate, because our responsibility and our desire as teachers and parents, you would agree, is to see our children move, from the earlier grades to the end. We want our children in kindergarten to finish middle school and then high school. All parents, before your children can drive, already envisage your child, crossing the portals of college or university with their stroll and their diplomas and the gowns. So again, how do we best I used the word prepare students just now, but enable them and stage them for success as they move forward. And so as an education group, I see that our role would be to look into how we could innovate curriculum and pathways so that students can then progress, special education students can progress appropriately into college level programs and perhaps even university level programs. Peggy spoke and Cheng-Yi spoke about universities offering those programs. And wouldn't it be great when and in days to come, students who do well in these programs are those who have actually gone through special education support, and therefore they understand it better. Yeah, I think we can think of so many other cases where someone is a language expert because he or she started off with language inadequacies, you know. So again, I think as an education group, that's where we see ourselves as a school in the part of that group is to, the pathways. Yeah, how do we innovate learning, teaching, and support to pathway students accordingly? So yeah, thanks for, and sorry for that long response to you, Mike, on that question, because that question really is hits my heart, yeah, in terms of our role and our purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mien. And I think this is a good point in time to bring in Ling Ling's question back to you. She asks, I've noticed from the SIS website that you offer the IB diploma. Is this suitable for a teen with Asperger's and ADHD, the inattentive type? And what accommodations do you offer?
Thank you. Is it Ling Ling? I'm trying to open up my chat. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for the question, Ling Ling. I think to answer your question, we would need to establish, what that the student that you're referring to, what he or she has done. There are some knowledge and cognitive requirements for the IB diploma program, assuming that that's in place. Then, of course, because we have identified, or the parent is now saying, this would be a child that requires some spec ed support, what sort of support that is required. I think because there is a range, we could have a very high performing individual. And again, I must say, I'm not the expert in terms of diagnosing or working with students with Asperger's and ADHD in particular. But I suppose if students are high performing, they've got the necessary background. Yes, I would say, not just theoretically, but practically that is possible. Just to prepare parents and the students in terms of their expectations. The usual duration of the IB diploma program is 2 years or 24 months, but the IB organization is one that professes and practices inclusion and respect for differences. And so if there's a need to extend the duration of the program, the curriculum, and to modify the curriculum to some extent, I think that's a conversation I would like to take up with IB, where it's necessary. Yeah, Mike is nodding because both of us have gone through the training or the background, appreciation of the IB philosophy. So I would say, Ling Ling, conceptually, theoretically, yes, but we obviously, based on all that we've said this evening, need to look at every student and where he or she is and how far more to go. Okay.
Thank you, Mien. And I know that Jolyn is adding some of the questions we received earlier prior to our event this evening from our registered attendees. But there is still one excellent question that I would like to address before we get to those questions. And this one's from Yi Wei Lim. And the question is, may I know if there are any practical solutions to change how the societies view people with disabilities? Because with the disability stigma, it may be difficult for many solutions, including inclusive education, to work well. Greatly appreciate your thoughts on this. I'm going to open this up to all of our speakers.
Maybe I'll pipe in first. Yeah, I think that parents, you are going to be your child's biggest advocate, because you will know your child very well, and people, professionals and all that will come and go. So I think this is something very difficult, and I speak with a lot of respect for the parents out there. Accepting your child for who he or she is, including all the challenges, is not easy. Yeah, and I would say that it really is a journey that you discover, and then you go through, you try and understand. But I always tell parents that you really need to be the person that understands the child the most. Then you would be able to help others to accept your relatives, your neighbors, the school teachers, etc. But it always comes first from the parent. And I'm also aware that, it's not an easy task. You're not alone. So I want to say you're not alone. Do reach out. I know that there are parent support groups here in Malaysia. They're not many, but there are if you reach out. There are other professionals and people who would be willing to talk to you and send you along in the right direction, perhaps give you resources, etc. I think it's an important process that begins with you.
Thank you, Cheng Yi. Would Peggy or Mian, would you like to jump in and add to this question?
Yeah, maybe I'll add a little bit about this. I think when I started this journey with special education 12 years ago in Malaysia, there were no awareness. I think we can't even find relevant referrals. And I think in Malaysia, we have journeyed a long way. I think parents now, you can see some hope coming through, like with Anne mentioning that NASOM is now starting the residential program. I think there's definitely lots of things that's happening in Malaysia. So I think like what we mentioned earlier, collaboration, communication, and the most important one is understanding and acceptance. I think it starts with all of us embracing, understanding and acceptance of all our kids that, you know, whether they are neurodiverse or neurotypical, they are all different and we are all different. So if we are able to embrace that and accept each other, understand and accept each other's differences, I think we can go a long way as a society. Yeah. Keep up the good work, Yue, don't give up.
Yeah, and I think as a school, you know, that days where you can have coffee talks like this, where maybe you can introduce the different areas of disability. I've seen, you know, some schools do it very effectively, and also for the right personnel to go into class so that children from day one, they learn about it objectively. So we don't leave our children to make up their minds or, you know, have misunderstanding based on hearsay and things like that. So I think providing that kind of knowledge, information, facts is also important. So you want other parents to also embrace the child, because your children will go home and then tell you, oh, there's somebody in our class who's a bit, you know, different, he does things differently. And you don't want to be the one that are, you know, reacting to something, you know, maybe a negative report. So you want to be there from the very beginning to tell the children, you know, what is inclusion, how do we treat people, the kind of words that we use. So yeah, it starts with the kids, and starts with the teachers, and start with the parents.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheng Yi and Peggy. And I'd like to chip in as well, because I think this is such a powerful question. So thank you, Yi-Wei, for that question. In pedagogy, in learning, we have this simple notion about the heart, the head, and the hands. Okay, so the head speaks about what we know. So it's knowledge. And when we know differently, it affects the way we feel and think. So by thinking and feeling differently, our hands, our actions change. So I think it's a process. So Yi-Wei, I don't want you to misunderstand that I'm discounting the magnitude of your question. But I just want to say that firstly, from the cognitive or the knowledge perspective, there's a lot of research today to show how, you know, how the notion of disability is being changed. Just yesterday, when Cheng Yi and Peggy and Mike and I were rehearsing, we said even in the Malay word context, in the Malay language context, OKU when I was young is Orang Kurang Upaya, which means a disabled person. And today, and Cheng Yi was the one who taught me this, this is Orang Kelainan Upaya, people of different abilities. So it's a process. There's a lot of research that actually shows that when children are studying together with others with special learning needs, no one loses. As a matter of fact, it's win-win-win. And I don't have the resources or the citations available. If you're interested, I'll find them for you. But it goes to show that the typical student learns not just more intellectually, because someone mentioned the buddy system just now. I think both Cheng Yi and Peggy mentioned buddy and mentoring. When we help another student, when we help our friends in their homework, you know, in managing situation, in building the blocks, the person who's teaching or facilitating it learns the most. So there's extra learning or emphasis, or what was that word? The affirmation of the the affirmation of that learning is so much stronger. And of course, on the other side, the receiving end learn. So it's a win-win, and even to the teacher, and there's research to show that. So I think it will take time, and I think we all need to play a part. I think, was it Peggy or Chingy said, it involves us as well. We need to change our mindset that it's not a stigma it's not the stigma, yeah, it is not a disability, it's differences, and appreciating those learning differences. So I hope that helps, yeah.
Thank you, Chingy, Peggy, and Mien for addressing that really important question. Moving forward, I'd like to get to some of our questions that we've received earlier through our attendees registration. So the first question I've received, and I believe this would be most appropriate for Mien to start, is inclusive education means also having OTs, SLPs, physiotherapists, shadow aides, and more being readily available. Is this something that Sunway International School is ready to provide on the school's payroll and not pass the cost to parents?
Great, thanks, Mike, and thank you to the person who asked that question. I think my screen has moved to Jolene, I think, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, and I like to sort of re-emphasize that as a school, we are a regular or typical school, yeah, that's moving, that would want to work with students who require spec ed, and therefore we will be working with students who are generally at level 1 or level 2. Their students will be able to be in the mainstream or the typical classrooms with some pull out and push in, as Peggy and Chingy have described, and is educating even us, yeah, as the teachers and administrators of the school. And this means we would not be at this stage in our settings, as it were, or the provisions, be hiring occupational therapists, or learning, I'm not very familiar with these terms, but would this be the speech language pathologists, yeah, and the physiotherapists or shadow aides? We will have teachers with spec ed background to coordinate, and we will have some educational assistance to support, but we will not be investing in specialists that are listed here. The school as a whole, I will just throw this in. I think there may be some other related questions. Even in terms of fee structure, I think some parents were asking, we do not discriminate or differentiate the students based on fees. Yeah, all our students pay the general fees. However, at the application process or at the enrollment stage, if when we do the readiness assessment and the placement observations, where children are there, then identified or parents have shared that these students or their children require spec ed support, then the additional diagnosis or the additional support, the additional customization of learning programs would attract additional costs, and this would be defrayed to the parents concerned. Yeah, so the school will have a general admin fee for spec ed students so that we can administer and coordinate, but every child is different, and therefore depending on the level of support and need that's required, we'll be working with parents individually on that. So I would just like to share, my colleague in SIS Johor is here. So we've had a student and who has just left us coincidentally, but this student required an additional shadow teacher in the class. And it's very much through discussion and arrangement with the parents, but it was the parents who supported their own son with the shadow teacher. Okay, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, this family has now decided to migrate, and they're in a different country, and so they are no longer with our school. But that's just to show how one particular example or one particular case panned out. Yeah. Okay, so I hope this addresses your question about the payroll and how it's passed, how the costs involved, yeah, are addressed. Okay.
Thank you, Mien, for your response. I have another question that came to us earlier by Chai Chun Ket. And the question is SIS an inclusive school with special education needs learning support? For example, for our new campus and our kindergarten that's coming up? And if yes, what does the SEN provision look like? And what's the learning support structure or provision SIS is able to provide to SEN students?
I think I've sort of address this question. And so maybe further to what I've mentioned already, to this particular parent or a member of the audience, I think the collaboration, SIS will be collaborating with external expertise, to provide the necessary support. So I think that may be something that I may not have mentioned earlier, but otherwise, am I getting the question correct, Mike?
Yeah, it's number 2 in our chat. Yep.
Oh, it's number 2 in the chat. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question again is SIS an inclusive school with special education needs learning support, and what would it look like if we do, and what is the structure of the provision on how we're going to address SEN students and how SIS will provide for them?
Okay, so let me perhaps answer it this way. All students that we enroll into our school will firstly go through a readiness assessment, okay, or a placement observation and interview as required. Through that, all students will go through that typically, and where we pick up that particular students require special education support, we will then refer the student to our partners who are external experts to run various, I hope I'm using the right words, Peggy and Chingy, but to run appropriate assessments to establish whether the child is at level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or more complex cases. And we will be guided by the recommendations that we receive, and this will be worked through our special education team and the admissions office. In cases where we are able to enroll the student, which is what we look forward to, the student will then be, their learning will be supported by a team, and the special education coordinator will again be working with our external consultants or professionals to determine the type of learning program that we might need to have on an overall basis. My dear parent or my dear member of the audience, we, as an inclusive school, as a regular or typical inclusive school, the children will be in the main classes, but where they are not ready for that so-called mainstream lesson of the day, and I'm not the expert here, so Chingy and Peggy could give more illustration, but they will be pulled out. They could have maybe special sessions before the day starts for them, so that they expend their energy or do activities that would focus their attention and before they're put into class, and assuming they can run through the whole day, that's great, but if not, they will be pulled out, and the program would develop the students to have less of this pull out and more of the stay in class, I suppose, is the goal of the teachers and the school. And that would be what I alluded to just now, that over time, if I fast forward, if I fast track it, the student then progresses into higher level studies and completes his or her program or educational program that prepares them for life. But if not, there may need to be other interventions as well. I would also like to say that because we're not a spec ed school in total, we are not a special education center, there may be cases that after time, through again diagnosis and assessments by our consultants and our teachers and in discussion with the parents, that SIS may not be the best fit school. And I think those are important and perhaps constructive conversations. Again, I mentioned about a student who had particularly strong needs or high needs, and eventually parents may find other solutions. So as a school, we want to support as many students as we can, but we know that we may not be able to support all students, and we want also to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, it's not about the school, it's about the child and how best we can support that young person. Okay, so again, I hope I have addressed that question. And Chingy and Peggy, do jump in. Thanks.
I think, basically the school readiness part, or your own internal assessment is quite important to determine whether the child is the right child for the school. And then I think that's where the assessment comes in. So I think the parent who asked the question whether a child is autistic and have speech delayed, it's a very general one. I think, when we talk about how delay, is the child able to function successfully, and how much needs and support and how much is the child going to gain from that placement, I think it's also important. So I think there's no one right, answer to say that it's this kind of children. We're not looking at categories because every child is so different. And earlier when we look at the developmental domain, there's so many things that make the placement successful, and plus the fact that teachers also need to be ready, school readiness and all that kind of ready to be able to understand the child's needs and condition. So I think if the school may request for the child to be assessed, or perhaps even this is like jumping the gun a little bit. I'm not sure whether this is something that you do, but even have trial days, right? To see whether this is because I think, well, we don't know. And for you as a parent coming into a new school, you may not be familiar, right, with the style of the schooling. And I think it gives everyone that chance and have that openness and honest discussion to talk about what's really good for the child, and it's actually for the sake of the child, right?
Great, thank you, Mian and Cheng Yi. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time, so I would like to bring our last question to Constance earlier in our chat. She asks a question directly to Dr. Cheng, but I think it can open up to all of our speakers. And the question is, parents now do not prioritize their involvement in children's education, let alone parents of SEN students. So how can an inclusive school encourage them to support their children's education and development? I like this question because it brings in our whole community and we can look at it from all perspectives.
Yeah, I'll jump in first since the question is directed to me. So thank you, Constance, for the question. I think this question applies not just, as Constance, you've said, parental involvement is not just in families where you have children or when we have children with special needs, it's also in other families. So as a school, what we do is we do our level best to bring parents into the conversation about their children's development and school day. We have what we call parent-teacher interviews. Parents are asked to come in to talk with the teachers on how the children are doing. Of course, we have, if the teachers require or observe that we need to have additional time to chat with the parents, we do that. Of course, as Constance, your question alludes to, we may be reaching out to the parent, but the parent is unavailable. We will have parents say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I'm in Hong Kong, I'm flying off, I'm only transiting in KLIA because I'm busy, I need to go to another place." And again, please don't misunderstand me. There are situations, whereby we are very caught up, and for all good reasons. So we have, like I think Cheng Yi was saying, we try to have forum like this. We have a parent council that's we promote a very active. We encourage a very active parent council so that we can also run activities with parents, and they could be talks, they could be workshops, etc. At the end of the day, if the parent is not able to be involved, we also want to. There are others in the school. For example, just now, somebody, Cheng Yi or Peggy mentioned a buddy system, and that's at the student level. But we also have teacher mentors or guidance teachers. We also have foster family situations. I thank God we don't have many situations where we move to that. But I think that's also a very possible and perhaps a positive experience or solution, to create fostering opportunities. For that could be again win-wins. So I don't have a specific solution to share. I don't know if my panel colleagues do, but Constance, just to say, you are right. It's not just in cases of students requiring a spec ed. It's a general parenting item. And some of my examples are just some of the things we do. Mike may know more. Mike also doubles up as the discipline master in our school, and so he would also therefore have situations whereby it links to the question that Constance is highlighting. So I'll pause here. I don't know if others want to chip in, or Mike yourself.
I can say there is a direct correlation between parental involvement and student achievement and success. So the more involved the parents are, the more typical that we'll see a student performing very well, no matter what their education needs are. So the challenge, and I agree with Mian here, it's not really a good answer on the school side on how to get parents more involved in their children's education, but we can do our part by increasing the awareness on how important family is to a child's development. Okay, unfortunately, we are almost out of time. So to all three of our speakers, I want to thank you for the informative and engaging conversation. But before we depart for this evening, in a minute or less, can you give us the key takeaways for our audience? And I'd like to start by asking Cheng Yi to share her takeaways.
Yeah, I'm not going to introduce anything new, just to say that, like what you have said earlier, I think the parental involvement is very important, very crucial. Spending time with your child and making sure that they play, they interact with people, and they take their eyes off the screen. All these things actually contribute a lot to their development when they have real world experiences and your time with them. Yeah, and that can really help. Whether they are neurodiverse or not, it can really help them to be more school ready, because school is all about social, it's all about being with other people. So yeah, hope that's my takeaway for tonight.
Thank you, Cheng Yi. Now, Peggy, what are your key takeaways for this evening?
For me, I think I went to one quote by J.F. Kennedy. Not everyone has equal abilities, but everyone should have equal opportunity for education. It always breaks my heart when I have to go through and advise parents about going to school, what's the right school, which is the topic today. So we hope that more schools, especially like SIS, provide opportunities for some of these learners who really have great abilities. All they need is just opportunities. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Peggy. And finally, Dr. Mian, what are your key takeaways for this evening?
I'll speak maybe from the perspective of a school or the education side. I think I want to encourage parents and teachers that working with every child has no standard template. Yeah, even if the child is not on any spectrum, yeah, and so on, because everyone is unique. It's just that the majority of the population shares that template, and so it does not become a topic that is of particular concern. So I want to encourage parents and teachers and family members. We are the mirrors to our children. They see what we think. And I think so. I want to encourage us to remember that it's just that all of us are different, and that our expectations should not be calibrated to standards because of what I've just said. Yeah, we all grow differently. We have different learning needs, and we respond to our environment differently. And therefore, when we set the right realistic expectations and affirm, I think that the research again has indicated that the outcomes tend to be more on the positive gradient than otherwise. So I think the awareness is important. I think changing our mindsets about the condition and setting differentiated goals and timelines. So thank you again to the parent who asked about age. Thank you again to the parent who asked about how do we approach it, and that we be open to various methods in addressing our children. Thank you.
All right, again, thank you, Cheng Yi, thank you, Peggy, thank you, Mian, for your time this evening and sharing your thoughts and perspectives, as well as your experience in the realms of special education needs and in school administration. So with that, we have now come to the end of our evening, and I would like to thank also all of our audience members. Again, Ms. Jolyn in our chat has mentioned that if we weren't able to address the question that you've already posted to us, we will do our best to respond to you. And if you have any further questions, don't be shy. You can contact us at info.sis at sunway.edu.my. And in the meantime, you can always contact us for more info on how we can support you and your child's learning and development. So before you go, we do have some exciting highlights to share. SIS, Sunway International School at Sunway City, will be moving into a newer and bigger campus in USJ 1 at the start of next year. So do check out our inaugural bursaries. And please note that our intake date for July will be coming in very soon. So we are accepting registration now. And further on in August, we will have our IB, the International Baccalaureate Exploration Day. And then later on, towards the end of the year, SIS will be having another open day in October. But that doesn't mean you need to wait. You can always reach out to us, and you can schedule an appointment to come in and see the school and meet our administration team and some of our teachers at any time. So again, thank you again for your time and for your attention and all of the engaging and enriching questions. And thank you again to our speakers for your time and sharing your experience. And I would like to see you all again when SIS holds its 7th coffee talk in this series later in September. So thank you again and have a good evening, everybody.